Good evening, guys, and welcome to this week's ghost story from around the world. And tonight, I'm going to tell you all about the Lalaurie house in New Orleans. On the corner of Royal Street and Governor Nichols Street, in the French Quarter of New Orleans, stands the imposing Lalaurie house, which is one of the best-known haunted houses in the city. Tour groups gather here night and day, hoping to glimpse some sort of paranormal activity. Its origins begin in 1831, when it was built by Edmund Fawcett, and after that, it became the family home of Dr. Louis Lalaurie and his wife, Delphine. Okay, so like with all of my ghost stories, as you may have gathered if you watched them, I love telling you guys the history connected not only with the property, but also with its occupants. So now, it's time to spill the tea on Madame Lalaurie. Marie Delphine McCarty was born in New Orleans during the Spanish colonial period on March the 19th, 1787. Her family had originally come from Ireland in around 1730, and they were very prominent within the white Creole community. Delphine was raised on a family plantation, surrounded by the rest of the wealthy McCarty clan, but at the age of 13, she became involved in a scandalous affair with Raymond Lopez, a 35-year-old widower who had recently arrived in New Orleans to assume the position of second command to the governor. They married in June 1800, when the Spanish king Carlos IV found out that he had not been asked permission for his marriage to go ahead. He had Lopez relieved from his duties and ordered him back to Spain. Lopez obviously went back and took along his little young wife, and he was eventually pardoned by the king, who then appointed him as the Spanish consul to New Orleans. While travelling back to America in 1804, the ship that he and the by now heavily pregnant Delphine was met with an accident just off the coast of Cuba, and Lopez died. Delphine was now a widow, and a few days later, she gave birth to their daughter, whom she nicknamed Marquita, and then they continued their journey back home to New Orleans. In 1808, Delphine married for a second time to Jean Blanc, a Frenchman and slave trader, and together they had 4 children. They lived in a 2-story house also on Royal Street, and also on a plantation on the banks of the Mississippi River, before he too died in 1816. Poor Delphine, she had not suffered greatly by now. Not only she'd lost both her husbands, but she also lost her parents who were killed during an uprising in 1811. Whilst it was a sad time for her, these deaths had actually aided her in gaining a great wealth, as well as a social standing in the New Orleans community. In February 1825, Dr. Louis Lalaurie, the son of a respectable middle-class French family, arrived in New Orleans after moving there from France in hope to seek his fortune in the New World. Aged only 22 years old and fresh out of middle school, he was a naive but ambitious young man. He placed an ad announcing that he specialised in straightening crooked backs and other deformities. And it was due to his speciality that he was hired by Madame Blanc to help cure her daughter Pauline from a spinal deformity. He used all sorts of medical equipment on her that looked quite torturous. Sadly, Delphine's daughter was not cured, but Delphine didn't mind so much, as she had fallen madly in love with the young doctor and they became intimate, which resulted in Delphine, at age 38, becoming pregnant. On August 13th, 1827, Delphine gave birth to their son, Jean-Louis, and 5 months later, on January 12th, 1828, Delphine and Louis married. Now, as mentioned before, Delphine was minted. She was proper wealthy. She had so much money. It was just what? Whereas Louis really hadn't got much money to his name at all, full stop. He really didn't. Anyway, for the first few years of her marriage, they lived at Delphine's family plantation until she set her sights on a fine 2-storey mansion that was being built at the corner of Royal Street. In 1831, Delphine purchased her dream home, and she had it fitted out with the finest furniture available. Sparkling chandeliers were fitted, and she had gold-plated trim on all the windows and doors. In 1832, the couple, along with their son and 2 of Delphine's daughters, moved into their Creole mansion, while Delphine relied on a small army of slaves to help manage it. To accommodate these slaves, she had slave quarters attached to the top floor of the house, so she had them at her beck and call whenever she required them. Delphine was considered one of the most intelligent and beautiful women in the city, as well as one of the most influential, and she enjoyed showing off her daughters, who always wore the finest dresses. They became renowned for their spectacular balls, parties and fancy galas, which were held on a regular basis, and Delphine enjoyed pampering her guests with such attention that they could not stop talking about her. Sadly, her marriage with Louis was an unhappy one, and neighbours would hear them arguing profusely all the time. Not only that, but the neighbours also started to notice other things occurring at the house, such as slaves coming and going quite often, almost like they just simply disappeared, and then they were replaced with others. It was also common knowledge that she gave the slaves just the basics and nothing more, and it became apparent that she was indeed mistreating them. One day in 1833, a neighbour heard screaming coming from the house and saw Madame Lalaurie chasing a 12-year-old personal servant called Leah with a whip. They watched as she pursued the poor girl onto the roof, where she jumped to her death to escape her mistress's wrath. It is believed that to hide this from happening, they had poor Leah's body buried in an old well in the rear courtyard. Anyway, this neighbour went straight to the authorities and reported what they had seen, and due to a law that prohibited the cruel treatment of slaves, they fined Madame Lalaurie $300 and had her slaves impounded and sold at auction. However, their freedom from the cruel treatment that they had endured was very short-lived, as Madame Lalaurie, being the intelligent woman that she was, coaxed some of her family members into buying them, and then they sold them back to her in secret. By now, everyone knew about the mistreatment of the slaves, and soon the Lalaurie family was shunned by society. Not only that, but also within the early months of 1834, Delphine petitioned the court for a legal separation from Louis, stating that basically he was a crap husband who liked to hit her on the odd occasion. With that, Louis packed his bags and off he went. However, a few months later, the truth of what really went on behind the closed doors of the Lalaurie mansion case, when on 8th month, a terrible fire broke out in the kitchen and swept through the house. A crowd of people gathered to assist with putting the fire out, and soon became concerned for the slaves, as none had been seen escaping from the burning house. Eventually the blaze was put out, and the firefighters went into the property, where they found a 70-year-old woman, the cook, chained to the stove by her ankle. Madame Lalaurie told the firefighters that she had done this so as to stop her from running away. Obviously, the sumptuous meals that she had cooked for her were truly that awesome. But when the cook was being removed from the property, she confessed that she had started the fire on purpose as a suicide attempt for fear of a punishment being taken to an upstairs room, a room that people never came back from. With that, the firefighters went upstairs to see what she was going on about, and it was then that they discovered a horrible sight behind a secret barred door in the attic. There they found both male and female slaves chained to the walls in a horrible state. Some were even strapped to makeshift operating tables, while some were confined to cages made for dogs. Some of the women chained to the walls had their stomachs cut open and their insides were wrapped around their waists. One woman even had her mouth stuffed with animal excrement and then her lips had been sewn shut. The men, oh my, the poor men. They had their fingernails ripped off, they had their eyes poked out, and they also had their private parts sliced off. One man even had a stick protruding from his head so as to stir his brains. Many of these poor souls had been dead for some time, whereas others were unconscious and some cried out in pain, begging to be put out of their misery. Those that were still alive were taken to the mayor's office where they received medical treatment, food and drink. Needless to say, what had been discovered was the most hideous thing to occur in the city, and word soon spread about the atrocities. Now, despite the fact that Delphine and Louis were legally separated, both of them were at the house that day, and soon a mob gathered outside the house calling for vengeance. But no officers of the law appeared, which made them angrier. Suddenly, Madame Lalaurie's enslaved coachman Bastien arrived with her carriage, into which she got into, and then they roared out the gates and soon disappeared out of sight. After that, the Lalauries were never seen in New Orleans again. Now, no one knows for certain what happened to the Lalauries after they left, but it is believed that Louis and Delphine made their way to his family home in France and were later joined by Delphine's daughters. After that, it's thought that Louis left his wife and moved to Cuba, where he died in Havana in 1863. But what became of Madame Lalaurie? Well, it is believed that despite the fact that she actually wanted to return home to New Orleans, she had to be reminded by her son of what had occurred back in New Orleans, because somehow she'd completely wiped it out of her memory. She just denied it ever happened. So she never returned home again. And instead, after a long illness, she died in Paris on December 7th, 1849. Anyway, back to the house, where the angry mob had struck the interior of the house and had caused damage to the walls and the roof in an attempt to tear the house down. What remained of it remained vacant for a few years until it was purchased in 1837 by Pierre Trastor, who rebuilt it into a three-storey property, and so it assumed the appearance that it is seen today. The house was then sold to Charles Catherine, but he only stayed there for 3 months after claiming that he'd been plagued by strange noises, cries and groans in the night, and so he abandoned the house. But it wasn't just him that experienced paranormal activity, as neighbours also reported seeing the ghostly sightings of slaves in chains walking on the balconies, and that they also heard screaming and loud weeping coming from the house. As well as that, they had witnessed seeing the house's windows and front door opening and closing by themselves, and some even reported seeing a reenactment of young Leah's death and hearing her heartbreaking cries near the fountain in the courtyard. Following the Civil War in 1865, the house was reconstructed and turned into a girls' public high school and was open to both white and black children. In 1878, the school became a high school for black girls only. and it was forced to close down the following year. It then reopened again as a music and dancing school in 1882, and all went well until the owner was accused of being inappropriate with the female students, and the school closed down. A few years later, the house then witnessed the death of another occupant, the eccentric Jules Vinet, a member of a wealthy New Orleans family, had lived secretly in the house from 1889 until his death in 1892. When his body was discovered, it was found that he had been living in squalor, which was strange as not far from his body was a bag that contained several $100. Not only that, but a collection of valuables and antiques were also found, as well as several thousands of dollars hidden in his mattress. The house again was abandoned until the late 1890s, when it was then converted into cheap housing for Italian immigrants. But for some reason, not even the low rent could keep them there. Strange things started to get reported, such as an encounter between an occupant and a naked black man in chains who attacked him on the stairs before he abruptly vanished into thin air. Children were attacked by a phantom with a whip, and a young mother was terrified to find a woman in elegant evening clothes bending over a sleeping child. After that, the house was again deserted until it was sold to William Warrington, who turned the house into a refuge for homeless delinquents. It stayed this way until 1932, when it was sold again, this time to the Grand Consistory of Louisiana, who then resold it 10 years later in 1942. During those 10 years, the house became a bar, was called a haunted saloon, and then after that it became a furniture store. However, the merchandise was found ruined on several occasions, so it shut down pretty soon afterwards. Again, the house remained empty until 1969, where it was renovated and transformed into luxury apartments. However, whilst the house was being remodelled, a graveyard was found in the back of the house beneath the wooden floor. It is believed that this was Madame Lalaurie's own private graveyard, where she had hastily buried her dead slaves to avoid being seen disposing of them. This finally answered the mystery of where all the slaves that had been seen coming to work there and then disappearing, never to be seen again, had gone. It also makes you wonder just how many more victims she may have claimed. In the mid-1980s, the house was purchased by Harry Albright, a retired physician, who restored the house back to its original state. According to reports told by Kathy, a local radiologist and a regular guest at the house, there were always strange and unexplainable things occurring. Footsteps would be heard on a blocked attic stairway near the bathroom in a remote part of the house. Voices were heard in the guest bedrooms, and unexplained movements were heard in the empty attic spaces. One day, Kathy and Harry were having a cigarette on one of the balconies overlooking the courtyard, and they both heard the sound of children laughing, accompanied by invisible feet running over the worn courtyard bricks. Whilst the fireplace was being restored in a room that was being renovated, a rolled up parchment was discovered, and when opened, it turned out to be the now famous portrait of Madame Lalaurie. After this discovery, strange activities started to occur in the room, which included the workman's tools disappearing. One day, a workman was up his ladder when he felt a tug at his trouser leg. He looked down to see who it was, and to his horror, he saw the misty figure of a woman glaring up at him before she disappeared. Many believe that this was the ghost of Madame Lalaurie, who was probably wondering what the hell had happened to her house. Another encounter that Kathy experienced for herself took place in 2000 when she was helping Harry pack up his belongings after he sold the house to James Monroe III. The room that she was in at the time was a very large one, and it had sliding doors that separated it into two rooms. All of a sudden she felt really uncomfortable, and at one point she even said that she thought someone had turned the light on at the other side of the room, but she ignored it and carried on putting books into the boxes until she noticed that one of the sliding doors was open. She looked through the gap but saw no one, so thought, okay, weird, and felt an urge all of a sudden to get a move on and get the hell out of there as quick as she could. She returned to boxing up the books and then felt the urge to look up again, and there, with his hand braced on the doorframe, was the misty figure of a man, which looked more visible from the waist up, as she could not see his legs. Okay, picture really doesn't do this much justice, but it was the best I could find at the time. Anyway, she described this man as having longish hair that was slicked to one side, and that he also had a neat beard styled in a typical style of the 1800s. She said that he was wearing a white shirt with a cravat and gold-toned waistcoat, and she could just make out the top of his brown trousers. Kathy stated that he was just stood there looking at her as though to say, "Who are you?" And then he tilted his head at her before disappearing before her very eyes. When she told Harry about what she'd seen, he admitted to her that he'd also seen this ghostly man on occasions, and that he'd also smelt cigar smoke lingering in the air afterwards. They believe that he is the ghost of Dr. Lalaurie, and they think that he liked the fact that a physician was living in his home. In 2002, the house was sold again to a private buyer who then resold it in 2007 to the actor Nicolas Cage for $3.5 million. He never actually lived there, so never experienced any spooky goings on, but also eventually had to sell the house in 2009 at a loss of $2.3 million when he went bankrupt. The last person to buy the house and is still to date occupier is Michael Whalen, an energy trader from Houston. Hence why the house is not open to the public. He claims that the house is no longer haunted, but that does not stop the ghost tours that pass by it every single day and night, with tourists waiting in anticipation of hearing the ghostly cries of Madame Lalaurie's victims. And that concludes tonight's ghost story from around the world. I do hope you enjoyed it, and as usual, if you did, please remember to give this video a thumbs up. And that is it from me tonight, guys. Please do take care. Sleep tight. Don't let those bed bugs bite. Bye for now.